Benjamin Franklin, renowned inventor, scientist, diplomat, and writer, once said, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail." If Franklin relied strongly on effective planning to make a significant impact on the world, it would be unwise for you to think that you can ace the selective test without a structured exam strategy. Did you know now in the computer-based selective test exam, you will now only be able to see one question at a time in the reading section. This change in format means that your exam technique approach must change too. The approach that you have when approaching the paper-based exams should not be the exact same as the way you approach the computer-based exams. My name's Nelson Luo, and I'm the founder of NL English Academy. Over the past few years, I've led the NL English Academy team ahead to push hundreds of students into top OC and selective schools. Previously, I did attend the #1 New South Wales selective school, North Sydney Boys, and I graduated within the top 2% of Australia. And now I'm on a mission to share free resources, guides, and exam strategies to the wider community of parents. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the exact exam tips and strategies your child must use in every single section of the reading paper to effectively ace the selective test. Before we dive into the techniques, we first need to understand how the new selective test reading exam format looks like. The exam has the same structure as all previous paper-based exams. 30 questions to be completed in 40 minutes. But on the exam guidelines, you may see that there are only 16 questions in the actual paper. The only difference now is that question 15, instead of being separated into its own separate question for the closed passage section, that one question has 6 mini questions which are worth 1 mark each. Question 16 is the choose the extract section, which comprises of 10 questions, which are obviously 10 marks total as well. Let's look at dual short stories. For these dual short stories, students can see extract A and extract B on the left and one question only on the right. For poems, students can also see one poem on the left and one question on the right. You can click the next button to keep flicking back and forth between each of the questions for these two sections. For the closed passage question 15, and the choose the extract section in question 16, all the questions remain on the one page. Without being able to see all the questions at the same time in the dual short story section and the poem section, your exam technique must change. Now, let's go step by step on how to master each specific section. Dual short stories can oftentimes be quite difficult for students to pick up the key ideas and main messages when scanning the longer texts. Students are presented with 2 fiction extracts, often written in different styles or even time periods. Students should be focusing on picking up 4 things. Number 1, the theme and message. What are the main messages in text 1 and what are the main messages in text 2? Number 2, a character analysis. You want to identify the key traits, narrative arcs, or even the motivations behind any of the characters in either of the texts. Number 3, the narrative perspective and the specific writing style. Think to yourself, maybe one of the texts might be more informal, the other one might be more formal. One might be written in first person, one could be written in second person or even third person. And number 4, comparative skills. You need to understand what are the key ideas and main messages that are different from extract 1 and extract 2, because inherently both extracts actually may present sort of a similar idea along the same sort of track, but are expressed in their own unique way. Well, that leads me to step 1 on how NL English Academy students ace this section. Step 1, scan both extract A and extract B first. Let's look at this example on the right. So, as you can see, extract A, picnic at a hanging rock, and extract B. Sort of skimming through extract A, I can sort of, think to myself, this passage describes a group of girls from a boarding school traveling by the horse-drawn carriage to the picnic spot. As I read through the text, I do see the writing style as being a little bit more formal, and thinking to myself, it's a little bit similar to the representation of how strict that boarding school is. So you can see those sort of parallels coming there already. And as they embark on their excursion, it's in a way like a newfound sense of freedom. The descriptions do have a lot of sensory detail, so hooves tapping, the dusty roads, and even the heat. And you can sort of see the contrast between the strictness of the school and how they are sort of letting loose at the picnic rock. Moving on to extract B. So extract B is coming from more of a humorous or even informal tone. If you sort of skim through it, the narrator's tone in a way is even quite casual, humorous, and even self-deprecating at times, which is quite interesting. There's quite a few exaggerations, such as the drool-covered shirt, which in a way it's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's for a more comedic effect. The character's arrival at Dreamworld and all the roller coasters, in a way, is a representation of childhood. There's also parts as you flick through where you can pick out that the passage also talks about cultural and personal identity, where the family doesn't enjoy, the outdoors. So let's look at the similarities in the ideas. So number one, the biggest similarity that you can see are journeys and excitement. Both extracts revolve around going somewhere. So the first one is about the girls who are going to the picnic rock. The second one being the family that's going to Dreamworld. In a way, both are expressed from a tone coming from anticipation. Number two, freedom and restraint. So in extract A, the schoolgirls experience an escape from their traditional schooling life and the strictness of the boarding school. Whereas in extract B, it's more so the family who's escaping their very monotonous and cyclical lifestyle. And number three, as we read through, we can see that both extracts do have quite a lot of vivid and sensory detail and imagery. Jumping into the differences, so there's a few key differences. The first one being the tone and style. Extract A is a lot more slower paced and in a way a little bit more formal. And in a way, it's sort of a poetic sort of flow. However, in extract B, the comedic and almost humorous angle in a way is a lot more fast paced and sort of in a conversational style, just like I'm talking to you right now. The setting and time period number two is quite different as well. So as you read through, extract A is a little bit older, whereas extract B is a lot more contemporary and in today's day and age. Number three, the themes are quite different as well. In extract A, it's more about discipline and I guess the sense of adventure, whereas extract B, it's more of a sense of humor and family dynamics. Now, jumping on to the questions, this is where step 2 comes in. For each question, as you go through them, think about what the answer is in your head first. So what I mean by that is after reading the questions, you sort of have an idea of what the answer actually is before looking at any of the 4 answer choices. For example, in question 1, the question's asking, both extracts mention that during the trip, the passages either, and then you have the 4 answers that are in front of you. But without actually looking at these 4 options first, in my mind, the first idea that comes up is, in a way, something uncomfortable. And something uncomfortable is most similar to the third option, which is experiencing some discomfort. Now, this is supported by both extracts, as both the characters in either of the extracts talk about their discomfort while traveling. As you can see, I was able to craft an answer in my mind first before actually looking at any of the 4 available options. Analyzing this question further, you can see that in extract A, that discomfort manifested inside that sort of bus or the coach, where it was quite stuffy with the heat inside. Whereas in extract B, the discomfort was in the form of that really cramped family car ride. Step 3. So now that you have one of the answer choices that aligns closest with the answer that you had in your mind, what we now need to do is ensure all 3 other answer choices are incorrect. So how do we do that? By proving each of the other options wrong. So let's see the first answer choice. The first one is true for extract A, as the girls stop to drink the lemonade and eat biscuits, but that's not mentioned in extract B, is it? The second one is only evident in extract B, when the kids see the roller coaster, but that's not evident in extract A. And for the last option, students can sometimes get tripped up by this, but if we think back into the extract, the students were feeling quite sleepy, but there was no active resistance from them trying to stay awake when they were falling asleep. So we can sort of rule that one out as well. You know, think of it like picking an apple from an apple tree. So you might have the lowest hanging apple, which might be a little bit bruised, but it's still okay to eat. You might have another one that's looking good, but maybe someone already took a bite into it and just left it on the tree. And you might have a third one, which is a little bit moldy, but then the fourth apple that you see is perfectly crispy, beautiful in shape, vibrant in color. So in a way, as you can see, there might be some options at times that can seem partially correct, but it's up to us to figure out which one is the perfect apple that you must pick. So think of it like that. And last but not least, if you are stuck, ensure that you use that flagging function that should be just on the bottom and move on. You can use that browsing button to click and go through each of the questions as well to see which are the questions that you did flag. Again, never leave the question blank. Ensure that you leave an estimated answer first before you move on, so that in the case where the time does run low, at least you've placed an estimated and educated guess there first. As a personal recommendation, I do suggest that you spend 1 minute per mark for this first section, and do take into account how fast you are skimming through both of the extracts. Moving on to the section 2, poems. So poems are arguably the most difficult part of the reading exam. And the reason for this is because you do need to infer meaning and dig beneath the multiple layers beneath the surface to really uncover what the text is talking about. You know, I think of poems as if we're like a gold miner. So if we think about a gold miner needs to dig through multiple layers of dirt to ultimately find the treasure. Similarly, when we read poems, we need to continually dig out and find out the metaphors and symbolism and what they actually mean to uncover the true meaning behind what the author is saying. And if you think of yourself like a gold miner, you wouldn't just dig 10 centimeters deep beneath the surface and expect to find a jackpot. Oftentimes, you might need to keep digging until it's finally there. And on top of this, poems can oftentimes have very different structures or very unique macrostructures that can align with some ideas that are present inside the text. I will go through a question about structure shortly, but here's how to approach poems first. Number 1, theme and mood. Students must look at what the theme of the poem actually is and what the mood and tone the author is actually writing in. Number 2, figurative language. Any figurative language, personification, metaphors, or symbolism, these are always clues that you need to keep digging down beneath the surface and keep questioning what that actually means. You might even want to ask yourself, what is the author trying to convey in what they're writing? Number 3, structure. So look for any alliteration, structural techniques, tricolon, anaphora, or anything other, whether it's the macrostructure or microstructure, and how that could represent certain ideas. And number 4, the poet's purpose. So think about, why would the poet use specific techniques in the first place? Is there a specific reason why? Oftentimes asking these questions can prompt yourself to uncover a few layers deeper to find that. Now, here's how NL English Academy students master this section. Step 1, read the poem purposefully. What I mean by purposefully is you need to take the time to read the poem. Don't try to skim through it too fast, and just keep in mind there's only 6 questions in this section. It's normal to spend a little bit more time per question for the section, maybe around 1.8 minutes per mark. Focus on purposefully finding links to society and the human experience, ideas which are a lot more powerful and resonate with readers as a whole. For example, in The Fish, there is, in my opinion, a lot of vivid and detailed description of the marine landscape. And in a way, it's describing the resilience of nature against the forces of time and destruction. With the imagery, the poet is exploring ideas of strength, survival, and the passage of time. The final lines emphasize how the sea grows old. That suggests that whilst the time may erode, the essence of life can't be taken away. Keeping this in mind, let's now jump to step 2. So, in step 2, similar to the dual short stories, you need to decide in your head first what the answer actually is. And a great example of this is actually in question 14. And question 14 asks, what does the form of the poem as a whole reflect? Before looking at any of the possible answers, you might even think to yourself, in a way, the poem is sort of, the stanzas are coming out, the lines are going longer, shorter, and sort of in an ebbing and flowing motion. To me, the structure appears sort of like swells in the ocean, swells that are coming and going. And especially that's reinforced by the idea of water that's within the poem. Similarly, you might have read in the poem, it does reference a lot of the barnacles and fish and mussel shells that are coming and going in the poem too. Now, jumping to step 3, what we want to do is to choose the option that aligns closest to the option that we thought of in our mind. Then we want to eliminate all 3 of the other options as well. So, thinking back to this question, in my mind, I had the idea of the swells of the water or the swells in the sea. Evidently, the closest answer option is the third one, the movement of the waves. Analyzing this further, this option is the best choice because the line breaks and the indentations create a flowing pattern in the macro structure. That, in a way, mimics the movement of water. Now that we have an answer option that, best aligns with what we are thinking in our minds, we need to justify why all 3 other options are wrong. So, thinking about the first option, the scaly shape of a fish is wrong because the poem, although it does describe fish, it's not what the whole macro structure is about. The tiny movements of sea life, that's partially correct, as sea life is obviously a part of the ocean. But if we think from more of a macro perspective, those small and delicate movements of sea life aren't significant enough to reflect the whole macro structure of the ocean that's crashing down. And lastly, the destructive power of the sea. Whilst the waves can in a way be thought of as destructive, and the poem does explore ideas of destruction, the way that each stanza flows on from one to another doesn't represent destruction as one thing. In a way, it should represent multiple things that happen over and over again, which is a lot clearer in the form of waves. Now that we have our option that best aligns with what we thought of as the answer, and that we can justify why all the rest of the answer choices are wrong, we can lock in on that response. And going on to step 5, again, if you are stuck, flag it and move on. You need to take some time and read the poem section carefully. Students may often try to skim through this section, thinking that they're actually saving time, but in a way, they're not actually retaining the information that they're reading. It sometimes makes students need to reread the poem again and again and again, and each time they're still reading it at the same pace. So all in all, do try to spend some time, especially reading the poem. The poem is oftentimes quite short as well, to ensure that you do uncover all the layers and all the metaphors and symbolism and deeper meanings are uncovered when you read it the first time round. Imagine yourself like an experienced miner. You want to know how deep the gold is every single time and make sure that you dig until that depth until you find that gold. Now, jumping into section 3, which is question 15, the closed passage section. So, closed passages assess how well students can pick up the flow of ideas in an informative text. Students are given a passage with several missing gaps within paragraphs in the text. These words are essential for maintaining the coherence, logical flow, and structure of the whole informative as a whole. For each of these missing gaps, students have a bank of phrases that they can choose from to fill in those gaps, and there will be one extra gap that you don't need to use, in a way to throw students off the balance. Some options may seem plausible, but only one is both grammatically and contextually correct. Keeping this in mind, there are 4 main areas of focus that students need to consider. Number 1, the vocabulary. So when students are looking through closed passage informative texts, students need to understand the definition of words that could and could not fit in smoothly within any given gap. Number 2, grammar and sentence structure. Some of the phrases might be half a sentence or the first half or the second half. It's important to see where these phrases can actually fit in so that when you read the whole paragraph in its entirety, the whole flow actually makes sense. Number 3, finding contextual clues. By reading around and understanding the flow of ideas, generally the sentence before and the sentence after can give you a good clue on what should be in between them, which is i.e. the gap, to make these two sentences continue flowing. Number 4, understanding a logical flow. And what a logical flow is understanding that in informatives, ideas in body paragraphs are often either chronological or going from one point to the next. Before I actually dive into the exam technique, I do want to first emphasize that in closed passages, all the pieces that you will be reading are informatives/reports. And for all informatives or reports, they generally do follow a similar macro structure. It's quite common you'd find an introduction, a couple of body paragraphs, and a conclusion to summarize at the end. Keeping this in mind, it's very important to know that it's very different to a creative piece or a poem or anything other. The introduction is usually quite summative. It introduces the main points. So any gaps that you might see in the introduction should usually be a little bit more generalized. This is the same as the conclusion, where the gaps are also in a way to summarize the whole text. So the gaps there should be generalized as well. In the body paragraphs, it's a little bit different. The ideas should be a little bit more specific. So you might notice that every single individual body paragraph in an informative piece should represent its own individual ideas. There may be a few overlaps, but in its entirety, they should all be unique in their own way. So here's how NL English Academy students crack this section of the exam. So step 1, we understand the structure of the passage itself. As I previously just mentioned, we need to see if there is a summative paragraph at the start and a summative paragraph at the end, i.e. your introduction and the conclusion. As students read through the text, they need to understand exactly what point is being made in each body paragraph. For example, when we are scanning through octopus farming, I can pick out the main words and the key ideas by just skimming through and picking out main ideas of each paragraph that does make it different to the rest. So if you think paragraph 1, ethical and environmental concerns. Paragraph 2, unsustainability of feeding octopuses. Number 3 is octopus intelligence. Number 4 is more so about the declining population and farming. Number 5 talks about octopus farming. And number 6 talks about some recent octopus farming advancements and a little bit of ethical opposition too. Now, keeping this in mind, what we now need to do is read around each of the blanks to understand the flow of ideas. And sort of reiterating what I mentioned before, the flow of ideas is understanding that logical transition between sentences within an informative to make sure, in simple terms, it makes sense. So what that might look like is, imagine you're trying to connect two carriages together on a train to make sure that the train is fully connected. Between each of these two carriages, there's obviously a link between them. And if you imagine in closed passages, that gap is that exact link. You're trying to find a sentence that links two of the carriages together so that they fit and can smoothly run down the railway. Here's a huge tip to remember. Ensure that you start with the easiest answer options first. So the easiest gaps are usually in the introduction or the conclusion, which are a little bit more vague or summative. As you answer the easiest gaps first, your pool of answers that you can actually select from becomes narrower, and that makes it easier to actually answer the harder questions. The next step, step 3, is to make a prediction based on the flow of ideas for what should actually be in that gap before you actually look at these answer options. In your mind, as you read through a gap, it should be quite evident in a way, what's this sort of general idea that would potentially link the previous sentence to the sentence after. By keeping this in mind, it'll be easier finding one of the answer options that closely aligns with your train of thought. Let's look at gap B. So in gap B, in my mind, something that would fit into that gap quite well would be something that describes how intelligent the octopus actually is. And by keeping this in mind first, by looking at the available answer options, I can see that in one such experiment, scientists observed octopuses building shelters from pieces of coconut shell. So that potential answer response, in a way, aligns quite well with the answer that I had, or the general answer that I had in my mind. So understanding that sentence sort of reflects how the octopus have a level of intelligence and their problem-solving abilities, I'd be confident in placing that into the answer gap directly. And finally, step 4, if you are stuck, do skip it and come back to it after. It's a little bit different to the 2 previous sections where you should make an estimate, but for this section, do not make an estimate and do not go sequentially from top to bottom. Again, I want to emphasize that you must start from the easiest answer option first so that you can narrow down your answer options and make the harder gaps easier. Only if you are running out of time, then you should make an estimate. But by making one gap incorrect too early on, you could potentially make another gap incorrect too, if the first gap that you placed in was supposed to be the actual answer for a later on gap. As a rule of thumb, you should aim to spend around 1.5 minutes per mark for this question. Think of it like solving a jigsaw puzzle of a horse. If you place the easier pieces in first, such as the edge pieces or the corner pieces, and to make the whole frame around it first, it might be easier to accurately make the puzzle, right? But imagine if you started from one corner to another and tried to force in some jigsaw puzzle pieces in too early and too soon. You might not realize, but your horse puzzle might even eventually look like a pony, right? Now, jumping into section 4, the last question 16 of the exam. Choose the extract. So, before I dive into the exam technique, I'd like to start off with an analogy. Think of this section like as if you're skimming through the menu at a fast food restaurant when you're in a rush. This section takes up 1/3 of the marks of the reading exam, being 10 questions in total. When you are reading through 4 extracts, you don't have time to read every single piece of detail. You need to pick out the key words and key ideas and skim through with a high level of reading retention, but also optimizing for your time and speed. In this section, students are given 10 specific questions based on either extract A, B, C, or D. As a preface, I would recommend maximum 1 minute per mark, and maximum. Each extract has a similar idea or sort of in a way like an overarching theme. So I'll give you guys an example. Say the overarching theme was about water. Extract A could be about the water cycle. Extract B could be about the story of a pirate sailing in the 7 seas. Extract C could be about sea nature and biology. And extract C could be about a magical mystery story underwater as well. So all 4 of these extracts are encapsulated around the whole idea about water, but each to their own in their respective idea. It's important to note down 4 things that students will be assessed on. Firstly, their comprehension and how well they actually understand the main ideas of each of the 4 extracts. Number 2, inference. So understanding connections and deeper ideas that may be present within these 4 texts as well. Number 3, evaluating. Ensuring that you have a clear understanding on what might be those small nuanced differences between each of these 4 texts and how they can be similar in terms of a whole overarching idea. And lastly, number 4, style. So being able to identify which extracts might have a more creative style and which one might have more of an informative style. This determines what tone the extract is actually written in. In my personal experience, I do see that most students find this section the easiest. However, because it's a lot easier, students might unknowingly rush through this section and make silly mistakes. That's what we need to avoid. Students may sometimes skim through these questions too quick to the point that the key ideas aren't even absorbed fully yet. And what happens is that they may incorrectly answer a question with the wrong extracts because each of these 4 extracts may have sort of overlapping themes as well. Be extra careful because this section does, at the end of the day, take up 1/3 of the whole reading exam. Now, here's the most effective strategy used by NL English Academy students. Step 1, scan all 4 extracts first. Don't look at all the questions first, even though they may be on the same page, as you can see on the right-hand side. But ensure that you have a clear understanding on either of these 4 texts. Ensure that you understand what might be those different nuanced meanings and how they might all relate to a similar overarching theme. For example, this question 16, when flicking through all four, I can sort of instantly see that all four of these extracts have an overarching theme of dreaming. They all explore how dreams have an impact on our perception as well as our reality. However, this leads me to step 2, where you need to find the nuance and key differences between each of these extracts. Despite all four extracts talking about dreams in general, they do all have a unique angle, and students must mentally summarize what those key ideas are that are different from one text to another in all four of these extracts. So for example, when skimming through extract A, we can sort of see that the idea at a glance focuses more so on the symbolic nature of dreams, whereas extract B is talking more so about the psychological and social aspects of dreaming. Extract C explores dreams as a source of creativity, whereas extract D alternatively explores the idea of lucid dreaming. Now that you have a good understanding of what are these actual key differences between each of these extracts, you want to go through the questions sequentially. Sequentially means from top to bottom. Sort of thinking back to the menu at a fast food restaurant analogy, think of it like a quick fire. You should instinctively have the answer there in front of you, because this section focuses less on uncovering these deeper layers, but more so on optimizing your reading retention and speed at the same time. Let's go through question 1. So question 1 is asking which extract describes a feeling of awareness of being in a dream. When scanning through each of these extracts, the one that popped out to me the most instantaneously was extract D. I did remember that extract D stated that the dream went lucid. I realized that what was going on was a dream. So without too much digging through any sort of layering, we can almost immediately match extract D to this question, because realizing what was going on is essentially, in other words, awareness, which is what the question is asking you. Think of it like picking the lowest hanging fruit from a tree. Let's say this time a peach tree. So just assuming all the peaches are all perfect, and you have peaches that are higher up, that are harder to get from the tree, and you have peaches that are hanging lower, that are easily picked off into the palm of your hand. Obviously, it's best just to pick the answer that's sitting in front of your eyes that you instinctively know is correct. On a side note, this section is usually where students tend to save a bit of time so that they can allocate a little bit more time to questions that require you to dig through the layers, such as the poem section. Now, just moving on to a few final tips. As you attempt past papers and timed practice questions, you will naturally find that there is a certain exam section that you may find easier or harder than others. Every student is different. Some students might find the poem section easier. However, most students do find the Choose the Extract section a lot easier to complete, just because there's no need to dig too far deep beneath the surface. As a personal tip, you may want to try out starting from the last section first, the Choose the Extract section. And what that might help you with is effective time management. If you're able to pump through all of those 10 questions first in under 1 minute per question, that will give you ample time to revisit the first dual short story section and the poem section as well. Students who oftentimes find the first 2 sections a lot more difficult and can get caught up with a few questions, when they do start with those sections first, sometimes they might feel a sense of pressure or even stress in the middle of an exam, knowing that the time is running whilst they still haven't progressed too far up on the paper just yet. So by starting at the end, or whichever section that you find easier, you can sort of mitigate this stress by smashing out the questions that you can get out of the way first before revisiting the more difficult questions afterwards. 3 final tips from me. Tip 1, just remember that you can go back and reselect your answers. So very different to the paper-based exams where you had to cross or make another circle or anything like that you may remember. For the computer-based exams, you can simply just click another option selection and that will change your response. Tip number 2, flag the question and always move on. Because you can toggle and jump to questions throughout the paper, don't dwell and waste time on questions that you are stuck on. Keep moving forward and come back at the end. And last but not least, number 3, the time allocation. Not all questions deserve the exact time split or the share of the pie. Naturally, the Choose the Extract questions should take under a minute per mark. However, questions that require a lot more inferencing should naturally take more time too. So don't feel pressured into thinking that you should be spending the same amount of time for every single individual question, because that's completely untrue. Now, finally, with these powerful strategies at the palm of your hand, your child is one step closer to mastering the selective test reading. If you did find this video helpful, please make sure to like and subscribe for more specialist tips from myself and my team. And if you want my team's help in placing your child into the top 10% band in selective reading and writing, check the description below for our free resources, our free study guides, and our course links that are all available on the NL English Academy website. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.